Hi everyone. Before this story unfolds, take a second to like this video, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications because the stories shared here are not just stories. They are reminders of power, patience, and what happens when a Black woman stops shrinking for the comfort of others. Welcome to Black Queen Dominion. This story begins quietly the way most betrayals do. Not with shouting or open cruelty, but with polite distance, subtle exclusion, and the slow tightening of a circle that once pretended to be welcoming. She had been part of that family for years, woven into their holidays, their traditions, their carefully curated image. She was present when it was convenient, invisible when it was not, and tolerated when silence served them better than honesty. Christmas had always been a complicated season for her. Not because she lacked warmth or generosity, but because it exposed truth. It revealed who was valued, who was merely allowed, and who was quietly judged while smiling faces passed the gravy and wrapped gifts. She had learned to navigate that space with grace, never demanding more than she was offered, never revealing how deeply she noticed everything. This year felt different from the beginning. The air shifted weeks before December arrived. Messages grew shorter. Invitations were delayed. Plans changed without explanation. The warmth that once felt forced now felt absent entirely. She sensed it before she knew it, the way women often do when exclusion is coming but courtesy hasn't yet caught up. Then it happened. The invitation that had already been implied, discussed, and expected was suddenly withdrawn. Not openly. Not directly. It arrived wrapped in excuses, concern, and false care. They framed it as protection, as consideration, as doing what was best for everyone involved. But beneath those soft justifications lived a harder truth. They believed her presence would ruin the family image. They never said it outright, but the message was clear. She did not fit the picture they wanted to present that Christmas. She was too much of something they couldn't define and not enough of something they pretended to value. Too independent. Too reserved. Too successful in ways they didn't control. Too quiet to manipulate. Too powerful to dismiss openly. They thought uninviting her would be the end of it. They believed she would retreat in shame, swallow the insult, and disappear gracefully so they wouldn't have to confront what made them uncomfortable. They underestimated her. They mistook her silence for weakness and her patience for permission. What they did not know was that she had been holding the family together in ways they never bothered to question. She had been contributing without being credited, supporting without being acknowledged, and investing without recognition. The house they gathered in every year carried her fingerprints in its foundation, though her name was never spoken when praise was passed around the table. They also did not know that Christmas had already been planned differently in her heart. While they were busy deciding how to exclude her, she was quietly preparing a gift. Not one wrapped in paper or tied with ribbon, but one wrapped in truth, timing, and unshakable composure. She did not argue. She did not beg. She did not ask for reconsideration. Instead, she observed. She listened. She waited. And in that waiting she allowed them to continue underestimating her, believing their version of the story was complete. But Christmas has a way of revealing what people try hardest to hide. And as the holiday approached, the silence they created around her became the very space where her power gathered. The uninvitation was not the ending. It was the opening. And as the family prepared their dinner, confident she would not be there to disrupt their carefully curated joy, she prepared something far more lasting than a meal. She prepared the truth. The kind that doesn't shout. The kind that arrives calmly. The kind that changes everything. Christmas morning unfolded exactly as the family expected. The house glowed with decorations chosen to impress, not comfort. The tree stood tall, heavy with ornaments collected over generations, each one a symbol of tradition they believed belonged to them alone. Laughter filled the rooms, shallow and rehearsed, as though volume could replace sincerity. They spoke of her briefly, only to reassure themselves that excluding her had been the right decision. They framed it as maturity, as protecting harmony, as avoiding discomfort. None of them questioned why peace always seemed to require her absence. What they failed to notice was how the house itself carried a different truth. The walls they leaned against, the floors beneath their feet, the warmth that kept the winter cold at bay, all of it existed because of choices she had made long before they ever considered her expendable. She had invested in that space when no one else would. She had believed in its potential when it was nothing more than risk and paperwork. They had assumed ownership meant familiarity. They confused usage with entitlement. As the day progressed, the weight of Christmas settled in. Gifts were arranged carefully, each one chosen to reinforce status, hierarchy, and expectation. Appearances mattered deeply in that family. Who gave what, who received more, who was praised for generosity. It was a performance disguised as tradition. And then came the moment that shifted everything. Her presence was felt before it was understood. Not through noise or disruption, but through realization. Through a detail someone noticed too late. Through paperwork brought out casually, through an envelope placed where it could no longer be ignored. She had not come to dinner, but she had arrived nonetheless. The truth emerged slowly, like dawn breaking over a horizon they never bothered to look toward. The house was not what they thought it was. The ownership was not as secure as they assumed. The financial structure holding their comfort together did not rest on the shoulders they credited. Her name surfaced. Not dramatically. Not emotionally. Factually. And facts are far more dangerous than accusations. The silence that followed was heavy. It was the kind of silence that reveals embarrassment, fear, and regret all at once. No one spoke because no one knew how. Their laughter from earlier felt distant now, hollow and misplaced. The image they worked so hard to protect cracked under the weight of their own assumptions. They realized then that uninviting her had not erased her importance. It had exposed it. She had never needed their approval to build wealth. She had never relied on their validation to secure her future. She had moved quietly, strategically, and with foresight they lacked. While they judged her worth based on proximity and perception, she built legacy in the background. This Christmas was not ruined by her presence. It was undone by their ignorance. As the reality settled, discomfort replaced celebration. The house no longer felt like a symbol of unity. It felt borrowed. Temporary. Conditional. The walls that once echoed with confidence now reflected uncertainty. They began to understand that power does not always announce itself. Sometimes it waits. Sometimes it watches. Sometimes it allows people to underestimate it until the truth becomes unavoidable. She had given them a gift after all. Not forgiveness. Not reconciliation. But awareness. And awareness once gained cannot be returned. By the time Christmas afternoon arrived, the house no longer felt festive. The decorations remained, the lights still glowed, the food stayed warm, but something invisible had shifted. Comfort had been replaced with unease. Certainty had cracked. And beneath every forced smile lived the same unspoken question. How much of what they believed was actually true? The revelation about the house lingered like a shadow. It followed them from room to room, settling into every corner. What once felt owned now felt conditional. What once felt permanent now felt fragile. They began to realize that their sense of security had been built on assumptions they never bothered to verify. And assumptions have a way of collapsing when truth finally enters the room. The inheritance had always been spoken about with confidence. It was treated as inevitable, unquestionable, and already divided in their minds. They believed lineage guaranteed access, that tradition alone protected their future. No one ever asked where the money truly came from, how it was managed, or whose hands actually shaped its growth. They were comfortable believing the story they liked best. She had never corrected them. For years, she listened quietly as plans were made without her. As futures were discussed as though she were a footnote, not a foundation. As her role was minimized into something decorative rather than structural. She noticed how often her intelligence was underestimated, how frequently her silence was mistaken for ignorance. And she let them. Because power does not need to rush. It waits for the right moment. And the right moment had arrived. The inheritance was not just money. It was influence. It was leverage. It was the ability to decide what continued and what ended. And she had positioned herself at the center of it without ever announcing her intentions. The documents existed. The accounts were real. The investments had matured quietly over time. While they spent years maintaining appearances, she had focused on sustainability. While they clung to tradition, she adapted. While they dismissed her as an accessory to the family, she became its backbone. The truth began to surface piece by piece, not through confrontation but through confirmation. Through numbers that could not be argued with. Through records that did not bend to emotion. Through facts that stood firm regardless of denial. They realized then that the inheritance they expected was not guaranteed. It never had been. She had been entrusted with more than they knew because she had proven herself when no one was watching. She had shown discipline where others showed entitlement. Vision where others showed complacency. Responsibility where others assumed privilege was enough. The room filled with a different kind of silence now. Not shock but reckoning. The understanding that they had misjudged her entirely. That their decision to exclude her from Christmas dinner was not just unkind, but dangerously foolish. They saw the pattern too late. They remembered moments they dismissed. Conversations they overlooked. Contributions they never acknowledged. All the times she showed up without being celebrated, invested without being thanked, supported without being included. She had never needed a seat at their table. She owned the table. And still she did not appear. Her absence spoke louder than any entrance could have. It forced them to sit with the weight of their own behavior. There was no argument to distract from accountability. No emotional outburst to dismiss as drama. Only truth laid bare, undeniable and calm. They understood now that Christmas had not been stolen from them. It had been transformed. This was not the holiday they planned, but it was the lesson they earned. They had tried to protect an image by pushing her out, only to discover that she was the very reason the image existed at all. And as the day moved toward evening, another realization settled in. This was not the end of her message. It was only the beginning of her reclaiming what was always hers. Because inheritance is not just about what is passed down. It is about who is trusted to carry it forward. And they were no longer certain they were worthy. As evening settled over the house, the family moved differently. Their steps were slower, their gestures cautious, as if the walls themselves were listening. The confidence that once filled every room had drained away, replaced by an awareness they could not escape. They were no longer the unquestioned owners of the space they occupied. They were caretakers of something that did not fully belong to them. And then, without announcement, without spectacle, she arrived. There was no dramatic entrance, no raised voice, no demand for attention. Her presence was felt not because she insisted on it, but because it had always mattered. She stepped into the house with the same calm composure that defined everything she built. The same composure they mistook for passivity. She carried no gifts in her hands. He did not need to. The gift had already been delivered. It had arrived in the form of truth, clarity, and consequence. Her arrival was not about reclaiming an invitation. It was about closing a chapter. The room stilled as awareness spread. This was not the woman they thought they could quietly erase from their holiday. This was the woman whose patience had outlasted their assumptions. Whose preparation had outpaced their planning. Whose restraint had allowed them to reveal themselves fully. She did not explain herself. She did not justify her choices. She did not recount the moments she had been excluded, underestimated, or disrespected. She did not need to narrate pain to earn authority. Her presence alone did that work. For the first time the family saw her clearly. Not as an outsider. Not as an accessory. Not as someone who needed approval. But as the axis around which everything turned. The house responded to her in ways they never noticed before. Familiarity settled where tension had lived. Stability returned where uncertainty had taken root. It became clear that she had always belonged there, not because of tradition but because of contribution. She moved through the space without hesitation, not claiming it, not defending it, but inhabiting it. Ownership is often quiet. It does not rush to announce itself. It simply exists, undeniable and firm. They began to understand that their power had been borrowed all along. That their authority had been performative. That the image they guarded so fiercely depended on her discretion, her silence, her willingness to let them believe their own illusions. Her return did not shame them. It corrected them. She did not seek revenge in the way they feared. There was no punishment, no confrontation, no public undoing. The lesson was far more profound than that. She allowed them to sit in the discomfort of awareness, to feel the weight of what they almost lost by believing they could exclude her without consequence. And in that moment roles shifted permanently. She was no longer the one seeking inclusion. They were no longer the ones granting it. The dynamic they relied on dissolved quietly, leaving behind something more honest. Respect replaced tolerance. Recognition replaced dismissal. And fear gave way to understanding. They realized that power does not always arrive loudly. Sometimes it returns calmly, already established, already secured, already beyond negotiation. Christmas evening moved forward, but nothing felt the same. The house no longer echoed with false certainty. It held something steadier now. something earned. She had reclaimed her place without asking for it. Not because she needed it, but because it had always been hers. And as the night deepened, one final truth lingered in the air. This story was not about exclusion. It was about correction. By the time the night reached its quietest hour, the house had fully changed. Not in appearance but in meaning. The decorations still hung where they were placed. The lights still shimmered softly against the windows. But the illusion that once held everything together had dissolved, replaced by something far more powerful than tradition. Truth. She stood at the center of that truth without standing in the center of the room. Authority followed her naturally without effort or announcement. The family no longer moved as though they were hosting her. They moved as though they were aware they existed within something she had shaped, something she protected, something she could redefine at will. The legacy was no longer a conversation whispered behind closed doors. It was visible now, tangible in the way the atmosphere settled around her. She had built something that outgrew ego, outlasted pride, and surpassed expectation. What she carried could not be undone by exclusion, nor diminished by disrespect. They finally understood what they had misunderstood all along. The crown was never theirs to give. It was not handed down through approval. It was not earned through conformity. It did not belong to those who spoke the loudest or controlled the narrative. The crown belonged to the one who carried responsibility when no one was watching, who invested when there was no applause, who stayed composed while being underestimated. She had never asked to be seen as royalty. She lived like one regardless. The inheritance was settled in more than documents. It lived in trust, in foresight, in stability. It lived in the certainty that what she built would continue long after opinions faded. The family could no longer pretend otherwise. They could no longer reduce her presence to convenience or dismiss her absence as irrelevant. They had witnessed something irreversible. This Christmas would be remembered not for its gifts or decorations, but for the moment the truth claimed its place at the table. For the silence that followed understanding. For the realization that power, when held by a woman who knows her worth, does not need permission to exist. She did not demand recognition. She inspired it. She did not take revenge. She established balance. And in doing so she reclaimed not just her place in the family, but her position in the story they could no longer rewrite without her. The night ended gently. No arguments. No grand speeches. Just acceptance settling where denial once lived. Just awareness replacing assumption. Just respect standing where tolerance once pretended to be enough. She left the house exactly as she entered it. Composed. Taken. But she left behind something permanent. Understanding. That some women do not rise loudly. They rise correctly. And when they do, everything aligns around them. This was not a story about being uninvited. It was a story about being undeniable. This was not about Christmas dinner. It was about legacy. And the Queen did not need a seat at the table. She built the table. She secured the house. She held the future. Welcome to Black Queen Dominion.